Hello. Pardon the mess in this video. I'm currently halfway through insulating and I decided it'd be a good idea to start doing the roof battens instead of clearing up. And so in this video, I'm going to show you how I got these battens installed, so then I have something for the cladding to screw into. Of course, I could do this into the metal structure, but that would mean I would have to use self-tapping screws in order to fix whatever cladding I'm using, rather than screw up into wood that can not only accept a variety of screws, but can also accept pins as well. Now, when most people do this, they tend to just screw something to the underside of the rib, such as a thin bit of plywood or something, and that will easily curve to match the curvature of the roof. But for me, as I'm 6'1", that's not going to leave me much room. I'll have the thickness of the wood and then the thickness of the cladding to contend with, and I'll be constantly stooped over. So what I'm going to do is actually screw the wood to the side of these ribs, and so then the only thickness coming down from that is the thickness of the cladding, which I believe is only about 10 millimeters. The difficulty is these ribs are not only curved this way, but they're angled as well. And so if I simply screw a bit of wood to the side of it, the bottom is going to be off at an angle, and that's going to be difficult to fix whatever cladding I want into it. I know this because my original plan was to just get one solid bit of wood, scribe it to match the curvature of the roof, and then fix it into position. But the scribing alone was difficult to do with such a long piece of wood, and so I had to resort to other means. And so instead of trying to scribe this batten in one long hit, what I'm going to do instead is do it in 3 sections between, well, the middle one will be between these two, sort of sitting on these 2 flat spots, and then the outer ones will be bridging from there to the outside and here to the outside. This will make it less cumbersome and probably a little less wasteful on timber. So I've just set up a little bench here so I'm not back and forth between the workshop cutting these to size. So yeah, just going to measure 460 on here, cut it, and then yeah, just figure out the rest. I'm using my Hultafors tape measure to mark these lengths, which has a built-in marking gauge. And if you watched my insulation video previously, you'll know how useful this thing is, and so I've put a link to it below. Okay, now we're going to drill and countersink 3 locations in here. What I'm using for this is this really handy bit from Bosch that just grips in your drill, and then on the end you can have a Phillips, but then if you push this up, bring it out, flip it round, push it back in, you've then got a drill bit and a countersink on the other end. And so all in one holder like this, I've got everything I need to get by, rather than accidentally misplacing this bit or having to change this whole thing around. I know it only takes 5 seconds to do so, but for the sake of just doing that and avoiding misplacing something, this thing's really useful, so I'll pop a link to it below. So the first thing I did was cut the angle of the roof ribs on a load of battens in preparation for scribing them. And also, while installing these battens, I'm also going to devise a method of pressing these dents out of the roof caused by my fat ass when I was installing the solar panels and skylights. So if you plan on installing anything on the roof yourself, just bear in mind that this is something that may happen, and it might be worth bracing the inside of the van while you do so. So the basic idea here was to cut a batten to bridge between the 2 flat spots I pointed out earlier. Then I just had to flip it around a bit to get the angle of the roof rib right, and then trace the curvature of the roof rib onto the piece of wood to then be cut out on the bandsaw at 90 degrees. Obviously there's a lot of bandsawing going on here and not everyone has access to something like this, but as usual I'm completely overcomplicating this. You can very easily recreate this process by simply using a jigsaw and cut the angle onto the short side of the batten rather than the longer one like I did earlier. But once I got into the swing of things, this was a really quick process. You just mark the length you need onto the batten, cut it to size, trace around the shape of the rib, cut it out, and then use that multifunctional countersink and screwdriver bit to get them in position. Right. With a bit of forethought, things like this generally aren't needed, but in sticky situations like that, they can be very useful. This one is actually a proper attachment for the drill, but you can get like auxiliary ones for this that are relatively cheap, so I'll pop a link to those below because they can be very useful. Alright, so with all the roof ribs done, the bit I need to figure out next is having some sort of fixing here, because I need to have something for the boards along the roof to finish on and like screw into or fix into somehow, and there's nothing here in order to do it. So I need to get some sort of batten along here. I also need to reroute this wire in order to fit it there, and it looks like the roof dips down slightly here, so the batten is going to have to be a little bit thinner than what it is here in order to finish at the same height. Just for a bit of context here, the cladding I'm going to be using for this van is hollow soffit boards, which if you want to do it neatly requires an end trim, and that end trim requires something to be fixed into. If I was just doing this with full length solid wood tongue and groove boards, I probably wouldn't need an end point to fix into, because that last batten I just fitted is only 6 inches from the back of the van, and so that will provide plenty of support. So the way I'm planning on determining this thickness, it's getting a spirit level along the middle of the van, resting it across 3 of the roof ribs, which is, it's touching all 3 of them. It's good to know. And then we'll just measure this. It's looking like it needs to be 39 mil, something like that. Definitely means the roof is dipping down, because these ones are about 50 mil. So 40 mil back there. Just double check these edges as well, because there's all sorts of weird geometry in these vans. Yeah, 40 mil still, so that's good. Nice and easy. There's also a little bit of a round over in this back corner here, so I'm going to need to like profile the corner of the batten in order to fit that, so it's not like rocking on it. So I got the batten cut down into shorter lengths and 40 millimeters wide, just to make it a bit more manageable, and then started planing the round over on the backside to account for that sort of filleted edge. But even with these battens cut to shorter, more manageable lengths, this was extremely difficult to get right. All right, so it's ended up just a little bit low all the way around, so I'm just going to go down the bottom here with a chisel just to skim a little bit off. Not the most refined solution, I must say, but it worked. And then I actually got another length of wood attached to the front of this, because the trim that I'm adding requires an area of about 2 inches wide to be pinned up into. This also gave me a nice area to fix the cable into, as well as cut some channels to travel into the walls of the van, which would make it much easier to hide with the cladding at a later stage. The same treatment was given to the rib at the front of the van, because just like the back of the van, we also needed some trim here for the soffit boarding. So again, I constructed this with a bunch of shorter lengths, and then added a full length batten that I could bend to match the radius of the roof to make the fixing point wide enough for the soffit trim that I'll be adding later. I then added a few more of these roof supports to push the buckled roof upwards, because I didn't want any rainwater puddling up there. And then finally, the ceiling was ready for insulating. It's certainly more effort installing the battens this way rather than just screwing them to the underside of the roof, but for someone of my height, it's going to make all the difference with the available headroom in the van. So I hope you found this video useful. If you did, don't forget to press the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video where we're going to begin installing a shore power inlet.